Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So I put up here a picture and a quote from Jeremy Bentham, who was a very important sort of practical economist in the 18th century, and along with John Stuart Mill, one of the important progenitors of the idea of utility. Bentham took very seriously the idea that utility was something that could be usefully used to have a polity that was well run, and sort of was very active during the time he was alive in trying to push forward the idea that policymakers ought to take account of the utility of the population that they were making policy for. So here's a quote from Bentham regarding utility. Nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. The principle of utility recognizes this objection. I'll return to Bentham a little bit later, and actually some next lecture as well. What I'd like you to notice today is that Bentham has this idea that people derive utility from their circumstances. They might be eating and so on. It might also be pain and things that give pleasure. And another quote from Bentham that you may recognize is that the object of morals and legislation ought to be the greatest good for the greatest number. So that last bit is a phrase you may have heard before. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I have a couple of administrative things to tend to this morning. The first is a reminder, or maybe some of you weren't here. We distributed problem set 2 on Tuesday. It's due 1 week from today. You should definitely be working on problem set 2 in study groups. And I hope that many of you have already formed those groups. A sort of thing I'd like to do to help those of you who may not have formed study groups is that I'm going to ask anyone who's not in a study group to hang out after class. I'll leave maybe a few minutes at the end and sort of come forward to the front. So if you're not in a study group, that'll give an opportunity for you to meet other people who might be interested in joining a study group. And I really want to encourage you. I mean, you learn more from members of a good study group than you will from me or from the GSIs. And working through these problem sets is much easier and much more useful, I think, if you do it in small groups. So try to form study groups, probably no more than about 5 people. And again, at the end of class, I'll spare a few minutes. And any of you who are not in study groups, I encourage you to come forward and sort of hang out and hopefully form study groups with others. Okay, so that's study groups. I mentioned the problem set 2 is due in 1 week. That problem set, you should all have it. If you don't, it's available on VSpace. A little bit of light reading. I've already mentioned that you should be taking a look at Perloff Chapter 3 or else the Nicholson-Snyder Chapter 3. Those chapters happen to more or less coincide, so make sure you review that material. A little bit of fun reading that's related to what work we're doing with preferences right now and has a notable environmental application is the subject of contingent valuation. There's a short and fairly well-written Wikipedia article on that, so that's a very quick but kind of useful read. There's a longer, if you're interested in the subject of contingent valuation, I should say what it is. So contingent valuation, that we're talking about Tuesday, who did I pick on for the indifference curves? It was Wes, yes. I asked Wes about choices he'd make between coffee and wine. Contingent valuation takes a conceptually similar approach. It's usually used not to value things like coffee and wine, but to value public goods or environmental goods, goods that there may not be a market for. So there's a well-known use of contingent valuation to assign a value to the damage of the environment in the wake of the Exxon Valdez spill, for example. That was a very famous and high-profile use of contingent valuation. But it's used broadly to figure out how much people value environmental goods that can't be purchased on the market. Okay, so if you're interested in that topic, you might read this paper by Michael Hahnemann, who's one of the sort of important pioneers in making contingent valuation techniques fairly rigorous. But this is really optional. You don't have to know this stuff for this course. Just read the Hahnemann paper if you're curious about contingent valuation techniques. Okay, any questions about administrative stuff? Okay, let's go ahead and get started then. Quick agenda for today. We're going to talk about 2 subjects. One is the subject of cardinal utility, and that has to do with Jeremy Bentham, who I mentioned a moment ago. The second is going to be a characterization of consumer preferences that's central to consumer demand. That's what we'll call marginal rates of substitution. So those are sort of the 2 broad topics I want to cover today. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Actually, maybe I should do something before I even start the slide. Let me go back a slide. Pretend you didn't see that. So here's my question. Let's see. So we just had a 3-day weekend a few days ago. How many of you, well, let me put it this way. Who had the most fun over Labor Day weekend? Okay, we have a couple. What's your name? Melody? What did you do, Melody? Okay, that's good. I like that. And you had your hand raised also. Okay, Desert Nevada, camping in Lassen. Very good. You think you? Nice. Okay. So we have three candidates. I'm sorry, I got Melody. I didn't get your name. Lydia and what's your name? Cassia. Okay. So Lydia, Melody, and Cassia each offer a claim that they had the most fun over Labor Day weekend. Now let me ask you, Cassia, how do you know that you had more fun than Melody or Lydia? Okay. So Cassia says she doesn't know. She's surmising that she may have had more fun. Is that fair? Okay. And Melody, do you sort of have a feeling like you're pretty confident that you had more fun than? Okay, that's good. Can you share your reasoning? Oh, nice. So you're imagining. That's very good. So Melody is putting herself, or imagining putting herself in the shoes of either Cassia or Lydia, and thinking, well, gee, if I was in those positions, either in the desert in Nevada, did you say, or in a music festival in New York, she wouldn't have had as much fun. So she's reasoning from how much fun she would have had were she in the shoes of either Cassia or Lydia. Okay, so what I've just asked these 3 to do is to make an interpersonal utility comparison. So I've asked them to imagine, or to say, well, who had most fun over Labor Day weekend? And Melody has tried to answer that, not by actually asking how much fun, how happy Lydia or Cassia was. Instead, she asked a different, because it's really hard to answer that question. Instead, she's answered a different question, which is how much fun would I have had if I'd been in the position of those other 2 people? Okay, which is a reasonable approach to that difficult question. Okay, so it's often observed that it's impossible to make interpersonal utility comparisons. I simply can't examine my internal state and talk to one of these 3 women and say who's happier at the moment. That's a very difficult sort of thing to do. Okay, so let's. I'm going to sort of flesh out this idea that these are difficult comparisons to make. But then we're going to talk about, well, maybe for practical purposes, it's okay to try to make those comparisons nevertheless. That's kind of where we're going to go. Okay, so so I say it's often claimed that it's impossible to make these comparisons. That's true. The claim that it's impossible depends on sort of 2 observations technically. And here's the thing. From a technical point of view, we talked last time about ordinal utility functions. And the observation that it's impossible to make interpersonal utility comparisons rests on the observation that even if you can trace out somebody's indifference map, and at least in principle it's possible to do that, we did a little bit of an exercise of that on Tuesday, even if you can trace out the indifference maps for 2 different people, you can't say anything about the level of the contours. These are all sort of rankings, remember. So if I show you one indifference curve and a second indifference curve that's higher than that, we can't say anything from the indifference map about how much higher the second indifference curve is. And so that's for a given individual, and we definitely can't make those kinds of comparisons across individuals easily. Okay. So we can make relative statements about that. So 2 cups of coffee makes me happier than 1 cup of coffee, but it's hard for me to say, it makes me twice as happy. Okay. And then here's the second point, which is just that it goes back to the subjective nature of preferences. So one person's ecstatic might be another person's content. We all know people who seem as though they're very grumpy. So a really grumpy person, if you ask them if they're happy, they may say, yeah, I'm delighted. Even that information is difficult to know whether or not they're delighted matches you're delighted. Just because you have sort of external signs of effusive happiness doesn't necessarily reveal a great deal about your sort of true internal state. It's difficult to measure. Okay, so these are the objections to making interpersonal utility comparisons. Nevertheless, when we go through our day-to-day lives and look at our friends or people we know, human beings are, for the most part, pretty sensitive to differences and changes in people's moods and whether other people are happier or sadder than they usually are, at least. Yes? Yeah. Okay. Good. So I'm going to tend to use I'm going to tend to use those as synonyms here. So utility is the technical term that economists use when we talk about utility functions, whether ordinal or cardinal. What we have in mind as economists usually is that the stuff that gives us utility is also the stuff that makes us happy. And I'm not aware of a useful distinction between those two within economics. There certainly might be. Yeah, but I'm going to use those as I'm going to use happiness when I'm being colloquial and a little bit sloppy. I'll use utility when I'm being more precise. But otherwise, I'm going to treat those as synonymous. There is useful research on this, a little bit. It's sort of empirical. It's experimental work on happiness. There's a journal of happiness research that includes contributions from economists and others. So if that's a topic that interests you, you're free to go consult the literature. Okay. All right. So even though it may be impossible, sort of on narrow economic grounds, we have axioms that we've talked about and a simple set of assumptions about people's preferences. Those are enough for us to be able to construct indifference maps for an individual, but not enough for us to construct a cardinal utility function for that individual. They're certainly not enough for us to allow us to make interpersonal utility comparisons. Okay. Nevertheless, it may be possible, sort of in a less formal way, to make those kinds of comparisons. So let me suggest a few different ways to do it. And these are all ways that people, in fact, sometimes use, I think. So one way we can do it is through surveys. So there's a question which is often asked on surveys. It's been asked every year of a representative sample of the U.S. population in the General Social Survey for every year since 1972. You may have seen it reported. It sometimes shows up in the press. The question is this. Actually, I'll ask it of someone. Let's see. What's your name? Sabrina. So Sabrina, let me remember the wording here. Taking everything together, would you say you're very happy, pretty happy, or not so happy? Okay, Sabrina's pretty happy. So you can ask that sort of survey-based question about that. And, knowing just at this moment whether Sabrina is pretty happy or very happy, I'm sorry, you're not very happy, by the way, may not seem like it gives very much information. But I could ask Sabrina on Tuesday whether she's very happy or pretty happy. And if she changes her answer, that may give us some sense at least of how relatively happy she is. Another thing we can do is collect survey data. This is another thing that has been done. We can collect these data on people's responses to these surveys. And they'll say, yeah, I'm very happy, or they'll say, I'm pretty happy. And we can relate it to other sort of aspects of their life. And so it turns out that for people who are married, at least, the question saying that you're very happy is highly correlated with the response to another question, which is, would you say your marriage is very happy, pretty happy, or not so happy? So if people in bad marriages tend not to be very happy, it turns out. It's also, if you were to take responses to the happy question and look at the correlation between that and the logarithm of household income, it turns out there's an important positive correlation. Happiness is also related to your health status. So healthy people who have more money and are in good marriages are more likely to say they're happy, which shouldn't be a surprise, but it sort of tells us that people aren't, people's responses to these questions aren't just noise. There's something meaningful in these subjective responses that we can relate to observable characteristics of the individual making the responses. So that's surveys. Another way that people have measured thought to measure happiness, this is an idea that goes back to a sociologist, Durkheim, is to look at suicide rates. So one way, and this is Durkheim was a sociologist, but this is an economist's idea. So economists like to infer stuff about people's preferences by observing their behavior. So if you go and look at somebody and say they buy a lot more coffee than they buy wine at a given set of prices, we infer they like coffee more than wine. Well, we can think about people making decisions about how happy they are too by looking at their decision to kill themselves or not. So we wouldn't expect very happy people to kill themselves. We expect very happy people and unhappy people to be more likely to take that route. So Durkheim's idea was you could look at suicide. Suicide is too infrequent an event to be able to sort of make judgments about small populations, but you can look at national rates of suicide and infer, or state level rates of suicide in the U.S., and infer, for example, that people in Wyoming aren't very happy because the suicide rate there is higher, conditioned on a bunch of other characteristics like age and so on, than it is in some other states. Okay, so that's another way you might get at sort of a way to measure not just ordinal levels of utility, but cardinal levels of utility. Another idea that a bunch of people who worked on, Darwin, late in his life, did some important work on this. Darwin and others of his contemporaries were interested also in this sort of really Benthamite idea of being able to somehow measure how happy people were and to use that to inform public policy or to inform various things you might do to people. And so Darwin has a rather nice, I think an interesting book, where he doesn't work with people so much, but he was above all a sort of keen natural observer. And so what he did was experiments. And his idea was that you ought to be able to make judgments about the emotional state of an animal, humans included, by looking at their facial expressions, in effect. And so he did experiments that involved things like he'd have a dog, and he'd give the dog a bone, and he'd draw a careful sketch of what it looked like. Dogs kind of grin some, a little bit when they're happy. And he'd hit the dog with a stick, and the dog would look less happy. And so he had this experiment where he was changing the circumstances of the animal's environment in ways that you would expect it to affect its emotional state, and then seeing how it affected its visual stuff and its features. And his idea was that without hitting the animal with a stick, you could just go and observe whether it looked like a happy dog or a sad dog and draw the appropriate inference. So humans are good at, we're really good at sort of guessing whether or not other people are happy by looking at faces. It's a social skill that most of us possess, and we're pretty finely tuned at teasing that stuff out. Darwin was a very keen observer, but not that great with animals, so he made some mistakes apparently. So he took a position, he did some experiments with monkeys, for example. I forget the sort of monkey, that involved the same sort of treatment. So, give the monkey a banana, hit the monkey with a stick, and he has some very nice sketches of these monkeys, some with big grins, but sort of modern researchers have realized that for those monkeys at least, that particular grin is actually a sign of aggression. They're getting ready to bite you. So you sort of missed that one. In any event, we can sort of, at least sometimes we might be able to think about measuring people's happiness or unhappiness by just looking, at how they look. So that's something we could imagine doing. Another way that people in recent times have thought about measuring happiness is to look at brain activity. There's actually a subfield of economics called neuroeconomics that involves, and the sort of main research tool in neuroeconomics are magnetic resonance imaging machines. And so what you do is you take a person and you stick them inside an MRI, and you do something to make them happy, tell them they just want a prize, or give them some food, or do something to make them unhappy, like make them do long division. And you look at the patterns of brain activity, that are occurring in their head. You can map these things out in real time now with these techniques. And so you know what the brain activity of a happy person looks like, and what the brain activity of an unhappy person looks like. It's related to Darwin's idea. You ought to be able to look at a person's features or an animal's features and infer whether they're happy or sad. This one looks at brain activity rather than facial features instead. And then finally, the other way to make these interpersonal utility. So the point is, these are always make interpersonal utility comparisons, which are at least maybe pragmatic, even if they don't have a great sort of theoretical basis to them. So you can look at brain activity in one person, and if it looks like they have a sad brainwave, and another person looks like they have a happy brainwave, maybe it's justifiable in assuming that the second person is happier. Okay, and then the final thing is one we do all the time, and Melody gave us an example of this. When we're making interpersonal utility comparisons, we only know about our own emotional state directly. And so one way that many of us try to make interpersonal utility comparisons is just through introspection and imagining that we're in the situation, somebody else's situation, and asking ourselves the counterfactual question: how happy would I be if I were camping in Nevada instead of up in Lassen? So that's a final and pragmatic way that we do all the time. You can also do this kind of thing more formally in empirical work in economics. So these are all sort of tools that are possibly useful for making interpersonal utility comparisons. Okay, let me move on. Okay, so I'd like to take a moment now to do a brief experiment. And so for this experiment, this is an experiment. I haven't done this before, and I don't know if it's going to work. But so I'm going to need 2 volunteers for this experiment, please. Okay, what's your name? Brian. That's right, Brian. So Brian, and what's your name? Ashley. Okay, could you 2 please leave your seats and come forward? Okay, just give me 1 second here. This is going to involve some computer monkeying around. Okay. All right, so I'm sorry, that's enough monkeying right now. So I'm going to ask each of you some personal questions. I hope that's okay. I'm going to do it one at a time, though. So what I'd like to do is ask you your forgiveness. I'm going to ask Ashley for you to step outside the hall for a few minutes. Okay, Brian, why don't you come over here and sort of position yourself centrally. I'm going to need to peck away my computer here a little bit. So here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to ask you, as I said, some personal questions. Before we start, though, I'd like you to imagine the following. Or not imagine, I'd like you to reflect on the following. So let's think for a moment, or you should think, without telling us anything, about your wealth. Okay, so we should view wealth broadly. This is not an accounting class, it's a course in economics, so we think broadly about wealth. So certainly your wealth includes things like whatever cash you have in your pocket, whatever you have in your checking account, if you have money in a mutual fund, all that stuff is obviously part of your wealth. It should also include the value of any durable assets you have. If you have a car or a bicycle, if you own an apartment building, your camping gear, all those consumer durables that we've talked about before, those are all part of your wealth portfolio. So think about all that stuff you've got. You might think also about other things. If you anticipate a large inheritance shortly, that's a sort of form of wealth. Okay, so think broadly about that. And just give yourself a moment to sort of reflect on your wealth portfolio. Okay, you got it? That's good. All right, so what I'd like to do is, without you telling me what your wealth portfolio is, because I'm not going to ask that person a set of questions, I'd like to assign an index number to that. So let's say that amount of wealth is equal to 1. That's 1 unit of Brian wealth. Okay, so fixed rate, that's 1 unit. Okay, now here's the second question. I want you to think, again, without telling me yet, think about how happy that amount of wealth makes you. Just sort of ascertain your internal emotional state regarding that quantity of wealth. Okay, all right, that's very good. Okay, so you still don't need to say anything. I'm going to record here something. First of all, I'm going to say that your wealth is 1, and I'm going to maintain that amount of wealth makes you, and you've got some sense of your internal happiness state right now. Let's give that an index number also. That's going to give you a happiness of 100. Okay. All right. So your wealth is 1, your happiness is 100. These are just normalizations. Right. Okay. So that was the easy part. Now here's the hard part. I want you to imagine that we change your wealth. So take all the stuff you've got, and let's imagine that we double your wealth. So we're going to give you twice the wealth that you got. So all the stuff you've got, twice as much stuff. How happy does that make you, Brian?
Well, mathematically 200, right? But I guess the diminishing returns. I guess 200.
Yeah, it makes you. So hold on. So this is true to your emotional state. You don't need to. Okay. So you think twice as much wealth is going to make you twice as happy?